By the mid-1770s, the British colonies in America began to feel the beginning rumblings of a royal cataclysm that would change the world forever. As the colonists scraped against the crown in an acrid fight for control, it soon became apparent that the only solution was to go all out. In 1776, the colonies declared an official separation from the crown, and 7 years later triumphed in the most epochal rebellion that the world would ever witness.
6 years later, political and social turmoil in France turned the country into a bitter struggle of the rich against the poor. With the growing resentments towards social structure, an unbalanced taxation system, and rising famine, the only model left to look to was the success of the American Revolution. As the upper and lower classes began to clash incessantly, colonies began to convene, and on July 14, 1789, a mob infamously stormed the Bastille. A revolution was born. Though years apart, these two monumental events in history had several things in common. One of the most obscure, Thomas Paine.
Born in Norfolk, England in early 1737, Thomas Paine was the son of a Quaker and attended school until the age of 13 when he became an apprentice. Just 2 years before the beginning of the American Revolution, Paine met Benjamin Franklin in London, who advised him to relocate to America. Shortly after arriving in America, Paine became the co-editor of Pennsylvania Magazine and published African Slavery in America. His real literary triumph, however, came when he wrote and published Common Sense, perhaps one of the most powerful works in influencing the fight for independence and the basis of the Declaration of Independence. He would go on to serve under Washington in an effort to aid the Revolution, condemning loyalists and supporting the colonists, as well as to become the Secretary of Congressional Committee on Foreign Affairs. 2 years later, he was expelled by Congress after his involvement in a scandal.
8 years after his expulsion, Paine returned to England in 1787, and his interest was again piqued in the boilings of the French Revolution. Working to defend the revolution, he penned the well-known Rights of Man, which criticized monarchy and European social structure in 1791. Wary of the possible effects of the text, the government tried to inhibit its publication. Paine outsmarted officials and pinned the responsibility on friends and would later flee the country. Despite the government's attempts to discredit him, he published a second part to the work a year later. It proposed a new structure, a representative government, that would use new taxing methods to eradicate poverty and would influence the creation of reform societies. Facing indictment for seditious libel, Paine fled Britain and was tried in absentia, was found guilty, but escaped execution. As a reward for his enthusiasm over the French Revolution, he was granted honorary French citizenship and was elected to the National Convention, and was regarded as a member of the Girondin faction. While supporting a French republic, Paine disapproved of execution of the king and proposed instead to exile him. For this reason, along with others, he came to be disliked by the opposing Montagnard faction, a member of which was the infamous Robespierre. As the Montagnards' power prevailed, they were able to pass in 1793 a law booting all foreigners from the convention, leading to Paine's later imprisonment.
I'd say, let's exile him to America.
Never to the guillotine.
Exile.
Execution.
Exile.
Execution.
Exile.
Off to prison with you.
While in prison, Paine completed his new work, The Age of Reason, which assailed religion as inconsistent. In an effort to get out, he proclaimed that he was an American citizen, using America's support of the Revolution as merit. But the American ambassador to France, Juvenal Morris, would not meet his claims, leaving him in prison. Feeling abandoned, Paine wrote a nasty letter to President Washington, labeling him a hypocrite and traitor. After evading execution in 1794, Paine was released following the fall of Robespierre with the help of James Monroe.
So Thomas Paine was this amazing guy. He's on the top of my list of heroes next to that Captain Kirk guy from the Star Trek movie, the really hot and dreamy one. I'm hot. Anyways, Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense, which I read, by the way. Just saying, Miss Tesla, give me an A on this project, please. Anyways, the Common Sense pamphlets, they inspired the American Revolutionary War and the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Paine was not a very rich guy, yet he still donated a large portion of his money to the war effort. When the weather had gotten all the other soldiers down, Thomas Paine wrote the Crisis Papers, which was a series of pamphlets that inspired the soldiers to continue fighting in the American Revolutionary War.
Thomas Paine did a lot for the American Revolution, and he essentially tried to do the same thing in France. The Rights of Man was like the Common Sense of France. It criticized oppressive government and promoted republicanism and democracy.
I don't think I'd like prison, but he had to go. Anyways, He did what anyone would do in that situation, and he cried for help. But the American ambassador refused to recognize his citizenship, and President Washington stayed out of the situation. It sounds mean, but in ways it helped reinforce the American policy of neutrality, and that's what's important.
Not a lot of people in America liked him after he returned from France. The Age of Reason turned the religious against him, and his highly publicized letters to Washington created countless enemies across the nation as well. His reputation went down the drain, but it didn't change what he did. He fought what he felt was an unfair system of government, supported a government by the people, and tried to spread that across the world and Europe. He reinforced both democracy and what it means to be a democratic nation.
As Robert G. Ingersoll wrote, maligned on every side, execrated, shunned, and abhorred, his virtues denounced as vices, his services forgotten, his character blackened, he preserved the poise and balance of his soul. He was a victim of the people, but his convictions remained unshaken. He was still a soldier in the army of freedom, and still tried to enlighten and civilize those who were impatiently waiting for his death.
Oh my god! What's that stopping? What's all the noises? When am I getting out of here? Where's the guard?
Normal!
Exile! Execution! Exile! To the guillotine!
He's up in the list of my heroes next to Captain Kirk, the dreamy one from that recent Star Wars movie. Well, anyways.
Star Trek.
Don't like that line?
Star Trek.
That's what I said.
You said Star Wars.
Oh, Star Trek.
Pooper.